Hello, and welcome to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. Here is where we talk about what life is really like as a sibling to someone with special needs. I'm your host, Charlene, and today our guest is Julia. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Charlene. I'm so excited to be here and can't wait to have this conversation with you today.
We start every show with getting to know a little bit more about our Sibs family. So, Julia, can you please lay out your family structure and what disability your sibling has?
Yeah, absolutely. My family structure is so interesting. So my parents were immigrants from Poland. And so they came here, and I think over there, like, disabilities were seen in such a different space as well. And we're born in San Diego. I have a twin brother who has Down syndrome. And I always love to say that even though my brother may not speak in words, he communicates through love better than anyone else that I know. And Michael is completely nonverbal, but that doesn't stop him from just showing up so authentically and to just teach so many amazing lessons, which I think are so valuable and so important. And I think it was interesting because I think sometimes growing up, like, I felt like I was almost like that solo child sometimes. Like, there were those moments where it was like, okay, well, I don't have that, like I had that built-in bestie, but I wasn't able to share certain things and like communicate certain ways that like siblings typically would. But I also had this like nurturing role where like sometimes I would step in as like the caregiver and like be that like protective mama bear. So it's just like this interesting dynamic, but I would never change it for the world.
Interesting because you're twins instead of a lot of other people I've talked to, right? They're either older or younger. And some people, it's, a couple of years, like myself and my sister, and other people I've met, they're almost a decade apart or much closer to that. So there's a much more distinguishing role of being nurturing. But as a twin, right, I feel, and I know nothing about twins because I'm not one, but I feel like you would have you have a better connection as siblings, but it's interesting because you have to kind of flip-flop between their nurturing because your brother can't talk, and also like you can subconsciously, you would just know what's happening, not only because you're his sibling, but because you're twins.
Exactly. I do believe there's like a little bit of telepathy there. And like, I feel like we do have that like intuitive nudge and we understand each other. And I think that's something that's such a key aspect. And that's something that's so important.
Yeah. And so we like to keep it open forum on the podcast. So what would you like to talk about today?
Yeah, I think my favorite thing, especially when talking about Michael, is like sharing about the lessons that he's taught me, especially just about life and showing up. And I am someone like, I don't even want to know the person that I would be without having Michael in my life. Like, he has just taught me how to just show up as a better human. And of course, I'm not perfect by any means, but I don't want to know the person I'd be without him. Like, he had such a profound impact. And kind of like what you mentioned too, it's like everyone has such a different dynamic with their sibling. And I notice, like, I think it's different if you're the older sibling versus you're the younger sibling. Cause I think the older siblings sometimes, depending on the age gap, right? There's that shift of like, they might have been the eldest child that had all the attention. And all of a sudden there's a new sibling, and then they're getting all the attention. So I think sometimes I've seen sometimes older siblings sometimes have a little bit more of that resentment. And then like some of the younger ones are already kind of like that's what they've known. That's just like what they grew up with. And so I feel like for myself, it's like growing up with him, it's like I would just like learn that that was like a normal part of life. Like, it was just like so ingrained as to being like normal rather than like, oh, here's this huge shift that happened and now my life has to be so different.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because it's so true. Like, because I'm an older sibling, there's definitely a shared, whether kind of this, well, like my life was like this, and then it's I very much have more tendency to feel what would my life be like if she were normal. Not if she didn't exist, but if she were normal. And I think that's just my own personal journey, right, based on what's happened to me and whatever. But at the same time, I go, oh, like, I wonder if that is just more of a older sibling thing, because there was a point in time, whether I remember or not, where she didn't exist, right? Just because I'm older just by whatever number of years. And it's interesting when I talk to a lot of younger sibs who just kind of had to, like, quote unquote deal with it, right? It's just that's they're already born into the kind of whatever is happening, and so their perspective of how they view everything is also different, which is good, right? But it's so dynamic, and I think as I've talked to more sibs on the podcast and just because of the podcast, it's so fascinating how different we all feel, but we all feel the same things, and it's so intriguing because resonate with and they don't feel, and vice versa. But there's other things that we both feel, and it's like you can't describe that to someone who's just neurotypical without someone that's neurodiverse in their family.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different dynamics, but it's like we do have this like very shared experience and how we kind of like approach the world in a little bit of a different way because of that. And I think so many of us have learned and had a little bit more like inclusion grained in, and we kind of just like see the world from that kind of perspective, which I think is so powerful. And I'm sure you've had so many conversations. Like I've had some where like people reach out to me and like they're reaching out with so much resentment from their sibling, or like people will ask me questions and they'll be like, "Oh, well, like it must have been so challenging growing up with your brother. Like that must have been so hard." And it's like, for me, the challenge wasn't my brother. It was from like a really toxic family dynamic that like I'm not going to get into, but it's like that was my problem. Like that was what made my childhood so challenging, and like my brother was the one that saved me from that, if you will. Like he was the one that taught me how to show up differently rather than like repeating patterns, and rather than like carrying on the generational trauma. Like he was the one that helped me like learn how to see it and break past that, which I think is so powerful.
As you're saying that, I realized like, oh, like there is a part of me that made that change because I want my sister, right? And like there are changes I made for myself because I can be different from X, Y, and Z. But there's other things where navigating my relationship with my sister has its own segment in the work that I've been doing to heal because she is not as not verbal. Like she's not completely nonverbal, um, but she's nonverbal enough to where like I can't have like a two-way conversation with her that makes sense to most people. Um,
Right.
and so it's interesting, like how do I navigate that because of the communication part, and how do I navigate that being 600 miles away from her, right? And
Mm.
it's like I have had to make choices where I have to think about now, like, okay, how do I want that to change? Because I can't just rely on like, oh, I'm like a 20-minute drive away, I can go see her whenever I want, right? And that's due to like physical location, but just in like, do I want to approach it the same way like my parents did, or my family or whatever, or like are we going to change that because I can make my choice and she also has an opinion, right? And I think that's something that took me a really long time, like, well, it took me a long time to be able to really just acknowledge it and let it be. I think I knew she had an opinion for a long time in my subconscious, but now that we're all older, I go, no, like, it matters. Like, she should get her own space and have her own time to do whatever she wants, and I can be part of it, but I don't need to mandate what I want just because I think that she wants this instead of that.
Yeah. And that's especially so helpful, like having that kind of like space where she can like have her voice in a sense, and like her opinion is heard and it's there. And that's something that's it's so important. It has to be something that's considered, right? Like she has like that space and it is her life. And I think it's so interesting 'cause I think so many of us have such a different space to navigate into adulthood. And there's so many resources that are aimed for children and like in the younger stages, but it's like this adult stage is so different. And like we're having to have those like, and I think some like my parents are kind of avoiding these conversations too about like what are we going to do with Michael in the future, and like because he's nonverbal, like he doesn't have a say. Like he can't tell us, and like that's something that's so challenging. And it's like I would love to have a situation where like he could even like live in my home for like part-time. Like I'm trying to find a way to like make it work both ways. Like I don't know if I could have him like full time, but I would love to have him like 3 to 4 days a week, or like have a center next door. Like, like I want to have him like really closely integrated into my life. but so many this like the community centers, it's like they have a 14-year wait list. Like there's all these other challenging dynamics, and it's like, oh shoot, if we want them in the space like that, we got to start talking about it. But I feel like my parents don't want to think about that because they just don't want that to ever happen. But I'm also like, y'all are getting old. Like you could say that right now, but like in 10 years, you're going to be in such a different like life space, if you will. And so I think like that's also something that's like really important, is to like learn how to navigate those moments where there is that kind of big shift, and there are a lot of uncomfortable conversations, but they're also so necessary and so important to have at the same time as well.
Yeah, it. I was very fortunate that my parents, when my sister turned 18 and we signed the conservatorship papers, like I was very lucky that they really like was thinking about it at that point. Like they already were like, you're not responsible for this. They were looking at all these things, and so my sister like has permanent housing with a community of other people that my parents have met, and there's a kind of a longer story with that, but it's I reckon it took me a while to recognize like that is not what, like they're above average in that regard. And at the time I didn't realize that, right? At the time, like that's my life, right? I'm meeting the other parents that they've met and their, adult children and all of these things. So that was just my life for a certain period of time. And then I have there's this other family that we met a long time ago, and I know some of their kids, and so it was interesting because they were very much in a position where their parents were kind of like, oh, we don't really know, but like there's a bunch of you, so you guys can like collectively figure it out. That's kind of like the vibe I got. I don't actually know what went down, but I remember at the time I go to myself like, oh, that's kind of an interesting approach. Like, not my preferred method, but whatever. But like we fast forward, that was probably when I was like in my 20s and stuff. And now I just go, or early 20s, and now I go, you know, really, I think a lot of parents just don't talk about it. I've realized that really the average conversation is we've acknowledged that we're going to die, and we acknowledge that somebody has to take care of so and so. And like the below average is just completely avoiding it altogether, and like no one talks about anything except the siblings because we're like, and that's the hard part, right? Like, how do you navigate a conversation where you have to not only acknowledge your parents are going to die, but you also have to acknowledge that who's taking care of my sibling, and that, right? In my opinion, there's already people our age who don't want to talk about their parents dying already, right? That is a cultural, like, people don't enjoy it. It's not comfortable. I get it, like, right? That's understandable, but it's like, it's how do you have that? And well, I don't want to take care of my sibling, or I want to live with them, or in your case, you want the hybrid, right? Like, I don't mind, but like that can't be your whole life because you also want to enjoy your own life too, and I'm sure your brother also would like his own space on some level, right? There has to be a happy medium somewhere.
For sure. And I think there's, like you said, like people, like it's so natural as humans to like avoid certain conversations, or, especially like talking about death, like that's super uncomfortable and people don't like enjoy that necessarily. But I think like there's also this fear, and I think my parents have this fear of like, what if they outlive Michael? Like I think they have this like also this other fear on top of that. And so I think there's all this fear that kind of has just made it like it's so hard to say, and it's interesting, and I get approached by, like, financial advisors all the time for, like, families in our situation, and I'm like, "Listen, I would love to have the full say, but I don't have the full say right now," and that's a whole battle, and, like, sometimes people will come up and be like, "Oh, can you send this over to your parents?" And I'm like, "Listen, you don't understand my family dynamic, and that shit's not gonna fly." It's just it's not, and it's like some people don't understand that, and, like, I don't ever mean to be rude, but it's just like, this is a battle I'm just not willing to take on. Like, I need to protect my peace.
No, yeah, and even without the the dying part, right? Like, there's times, this doesn't really happen anymore, but, like, there was a point in time where people, they would say, like, how are you? Oh, how's your sister? How's your parents? And I'm like, and I get that they're being polite, right? Like, I realize now, like, that's, you're being cordial, and, like, in society, we haven't found, no one's really knows how to navigate that correctly, but it pains me on the inside the minute someone is talking to you, but then you start talking about, like, your experiences, whatever, and it, like, shifts to your parents immediately, and I hated it. Like, even as I'm describing to you, like, the insides of my body are like, "Wah!"
Totally. It's like, no, I don't want to get into that.
Yeah, because it's just like, we're talking about me. Like, you came up to me to ask how I was. Like, it's not right, and I don't. That could be a variety. Right? That could be my own personal stuff. That could be a sibling thing. I don't know where it comes from, but it's
totally.
I do think it's interesting when people. It's interesting because it's like there's so much, like, kind of what we were talking about earlier, right? There's so many resources for all these other groups of people, like really young children, parents, the people with disabilities themselves, all these kind of in-between people, and then there's us, who are like these like young adults who are siblings who like don't have any resources, and it's like everyone, it's weird because everyone like thinks they have the answer, then tells us as a sibling, like, oh, you should do this, or they go, hey, like, oh, you have great ideas, can you just give me all your resources? And it's like, well, both of those answers are wrong, because you can't use those exclusively. Like, you can't, like, my sibling experience is not going to help your family in regards of, like, your parents asking me a direct question. Like, that doesn't apply to your brother. And inversely, if my parents ask you a specific question, it won't necessarily apply to my sister, right? Like, it's so nuanced.
Totally. And then there's the aspect of, like, especially if you're on your own healing journey, and it's like that aspect I think is so different, but I think, like, for me, Michael has been so helpful in a sense through that. And, like, it was always so interesting because, like, I had such an interesting background having grown up with, like, immigrant parents and, like, having gone through some, like, terrible things that, like, kids should never have to go through. And it was so interesting because I feel like people would immediately, like, blame my brother for, like, my challenges or things I experienced, and I was just like, "No, no, 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 no." Like, it was just so interesting, like, my family was much more, like, isolated, we didn't go out, and it was more of, like, my parents just grew up in, like, the countryside in Poland, like, they were out in the boonies, and, like, they weren't like, they're not the most social people, so it's like they just, like, stayed more at home, but it's like, I think one parent in particular would blame not going outside for, like, Michael, and, like, but I would never say that, right? Like, I'm someone where it's like, if I'm with Michael in public, like, I have no shame about that. Like, I'm like, "We're gonna show up as we are, like, you don't like it, get out of my way." And so I do think it's, like, it's interesting how so many people are so quick to assume, and then I have to, like, share more of my story and be like, "Here's the childhood trauma I went through so you understand, and do not throw my brother under that at all."
Yeah, it's the more healing work that I've done, the more I've realized how much like trauma exists within myself, but also like within sibs in general, right? And I'm not saying that every single sib has a traumatic experience, but it is fascinating that every sib that I've talked to that's been on this podcast, anyone that's over the age of 25 has gone at least one time to see a professional therapist, right? And I'm not taking that lightly because there's people who've been on here that have gone through years, right? There's people who've gone a couple of times and, you know, for financial reasons or whatever, but even the people who can't quite like afford it, they acknowledge like how important, like if they had the means, like they would be going more often, right? And there was a point where I was talking to my therapist and I said to myself, like as I was explaining something, and I sat there and I went, you know, because what I was describing was a little more general versus more specific to me, and I had my own specific like spin on it, obviously, but I just kind of sat there and I went, wow, like every sib should really just be in therapy. And not pointing that on anyone, but there's so much stuff to work through. Like, this is not just like, even if Michael was not as severe as he was, like, that you still have stuff because like your parents are immigrants, right? So that's its own thing. But it's like being a sib plus whatever cards you were dealt just makes it this slurry of like painful stuff that you don't want to talk about.
Totally. And I think, yeah, I think it's so interesting. I've been asked to like speak to different places, and like there have been communities I've reached out. They're like, "Oh, do you want to hold space for like sibs and like share about the challenges with like being a sib and like what they're, what they're going through?" And I literally have to say no because I'm like, my challenges were not necessarily with my brother. And like, yes, some of those things were challenging, if you will, but it's like I had to deal with something that was so much more like challenging and like that kind of trauma. And I was like, I can't hold space because that doesn't speak to me, if you will. It's like, yes, I understand, like, I have had a different experience, and I'm sure that's shaped me as a different human completely. But for me, it's like, I'd be much better at holding space for, like, more of, like, the generational trauma kinda thing than because of my sib, if that makes sense. It's like, that for me, just, like, it's like I learned so much more from my brother, and, like, yes, of course, I'll acknowledge there are challenges, and, like, yes, it would've been nice, like, if he'd been able to speak a little bit, like, there were things I, like, would've been nice, but it's like, that for me wasn't something that, like, irked me too much. It wasn't something that was like, "Oh, like, I have all these frustrations with my sib," like, that's just not the standpoint I have. I have much more that standpoint of, like, my brother taught me all these amazing lessons, and I'm gonna share those because I think he's offered me such a important perspective that not everyone gets to have, and I think that's something that's so beautiful as well.
Yeah. Okay, that's making sense now. Like it's like yeah, the picture of my head makes more sense where it's like it's much more like he's the silver lining in the your scheme of other things that have happened. Which
Exactly.
yeah, like and I think that's so fascinating too because because it's so and I don't mean to butcher it this way, but it's very like counter to like this what I'm describing, right? The typical like I'm mad and all these things, right? It's counter to that, but it doesn't make your experience less true either, right? Like
Right.
that's just as important, and I think I'm trying to find myself more like in a mixed bag of like okay, I've worked through some of this other stuff that's happened between like my parents, my sister, my family, whatever. I think now I'm trying to veer more towards the okay, like my sister's a human, I'm a human, what can we do just to be good humans? I'm much more trying to go in that direction now just because if it's because kind of like if I don't do that, it's going to be much more sad.
For sure. I think that's the way you said it's so true. It's like I feel like I have taken that silver lining approach, and like that's something I stand by. And everyone has such a different family dynamic. Everyone has such different experiences, and like everyone's experience is so valid, and I just know mine is just in such a unique space. And I think that is something that's, like, so important about Michael, and, like, that's, like, why I advocate, and, like, I advocate from that standpoint, which I think is a little bit different than a lot of other advocates. It's, like, I more advocate for, like, the lessons that I've learned from Michael, like, lessons in being patient with yourself, being more inclusive to the people around you, being able to shift your perspective, but also, like, being much more unconditionally loving. And I think these are lessons, it's like, you don't learn that during school. Like, these are not things that you learn by going to school. Like, we don't have a better human school. Like, these are things I learned from my brother, and I think they're things that are so important. And like, he's fueled my passion to be in the personal development space. And like, the reason that I'm like a life coach right now, he's the reason why I do all these things, especially like with that nonverbal communication. It's like, I'm so much more in tuned into body language, tonality. Like, these are things that I see a little bit more. And it's like, I think my intuition's a little bit stronger, especially because it's like with Michael, like there ain't no words. You gotta really figure things out, and you gotta like piece them together. And so all those things just come together and have been so helpful.
Yeah, I think the first time I had an experience with what you're describing was probably when I was either like 18 or 20, something in that age range. And it was the first time that I had met a variety of other people like with disabilities that were different than my sisters. And I think that's something at the time, like, I'm aware that there's other people that, not everyone has autism and that's fine, right? But when you actually get to meet those people and you meet their families and you meet other individuals who have like been friends with them for years, right? And that was the first time it like occurred to me like, oh, like the world would be so different if we just all were like that. Right? If it didn't matter, like, that you could or couldn't talk, that you could or couldn't, like, have motor skills or, like, any of those things. And I remember, like, at that time, I was like, this is what the world, like, quote unquote, should have been, right? Like, it's such a different mental space to be in, but it's so freeing for everybody, right? Like, one might think like, oh, like, this, you can make someone else feel better by like helping them do this thing. It's like, well, no, that's true, but like at the same time, if you just let them do their thing and they're just happy that you're just there to watch them shoot the basketball 10,000 times, like, they're happy. You don't have to help them make the basket. You literally could just sit there and eat snacks and just like tell them about the trip that you had to Disneyland, and like they'll be excited. That you don't have to make them feel normal. You just need to be there just to have a good time. It's not about acclimating them to make them what you think is acceptable to society.
Totally. And that's like one lesson I always like love to share about is like stop giving a shit about what other people think about you. Like literally it's like this, and I think about like times where like I've taken Michael to Costco, and like I remember there was one time like we were walking around, and I think it's hard too cuz like Michael, like, he looks a little different, like, he doesn't like, I think when you see someone who has Down syndrome, like, I think when you see Michael, you may not immediately recognize that, like, you'll know that there's something, but you may not be like, "Oh, yeah, he has Down syndrome." Like, I think there is, like, not everyone who isn't like, for the people who aren't exposed to this community, like, they may not be able. Yeah. For sure, right? There's some people who haven't had that exposure, and it's like I remember we were in Costco, and, like, Costco's just always that busy, busy space, and we were, like, trying to navigate around, and, like, I think we, like, got in some lady's way, and she made this, like, snarky little comment, and I was just like, "Oops, sorry, like, we'll get out of your way," and, like, I didn't even care. It was just like, "I'm with my brother, we're gonna show up the way that we are, like, we're gonna do our best to be respectful and polite," but, like, if someone makes a comment, it's like, I don't take it personally. And like, I'm in that such like protective, like, hey, I understand we're in a different scenario, but like, I'm not gonna let those things phase me. But then when it came down to myself, whenever people would make comments about me when I'm not with Michael, I would take things so, so personally. And I would worry so much about what other people would think about me and how I'm showing up. And before I'd go out, I'd have to make sure that I looked a certain way, that I fit in a certain way. And then I had this moment, it was like when I was in college, and I was like, I don't care about what people think when I'm with my brother. Like, I have no care in the world about what other people think or what they're judging. Like, that just doesn't matter. And then I was like, it's so interesting when I'm by myself. Why do I care so much? And so it's been this like, he's taught me this beautiful lesson of like, you don't need to worry about what other people think about you. Like, people all have their own experiences. They all see the world in a different way. And if someone isn't going to like you or, respect you for who you are, they're probably not your people. Like, they're probably people you don't even want in your space anyway. But it's also this reminder of like, everyone else is also worrying about themselves and what people are thinking about them. And when you see that perspective, it's like, oh, no one actually is caring about what you're doing. If they are, they're probably a human you don't even want to interact with anyway.
Yeah, like the level of what you think is important versus what actually is important is like so different. But yeah, I feel the same way of like how for a long time I would just take a lot of things personally. They were not even directed at me, but it was just someone would say something and I would just feel the inside, I would just take it upon me to then make it personal. Now I'm going like, wow, I don't need to do that. Like they're having a bad day. I'm just over here. I happen to be the person that they, said whatever to, but that's not my business. And then like go do something else. And it's, yeah, it's just so different because it's like I think if I chose to look through the world through the lens of my sister, I think that's just so invaluable in itself, right? And I don't do it all the time, but I think being being fortunate enough to be in our household, right? Like that did give me exposure to stuff that otherwise I would literally never have seen in my entire life. Right? Just like nuances of like, oh, like people care about like in terms of like stuff that would bother her, right? Like she didn't like cabinet doors open and just kind of I'll call them more silly things, right? I use that very lightly. They're more like air quote things, but it's just there's nuances about understanding like, oh, like she has preferences too, right? But she can communicate it in a way that's not like passive aggressive, right? Because there's times where it's like people are like, oh, I'm cold inside, but then they could just close the window, but they don't. But they keep telling the other person that they're cold, and so the other person's like, oh, do you want me to close the window, right? My sister would just see the window and just shut it because it just shouldn't be open, right? And it's so interesting just to be able. She's like, no, like I like things this way, and I think that's something that I always looked at that like, oh, like she just likes it, whatever. But I've now realized like it makes sense because if she likes it that way, why would she tolerate it not, right? Like if you were in my room, like I like my stuff a certain way, like I I shouldn't want to change it just because I quote unquote think it's cool because other people like their setup their own way, right? Like I don't need to copy that. I just should do it if it makes me happy.
I think also just like being able to like I think something is just like kind of like you mentioned, like that respect of like, and also just like doing what you like is important for you. And like, I think like there's this like lack of like people pleasing tendency, which I'm like, that's awesome. Cause I'm that person that might be like, oh, I don't want to bother people around me. But it's like, my brother doesn't care. He's got his set ways. He's going to do what he wants. And it's like, dang, that's a good reminder sometimes of like, take care of your own needs, do the things that you need versus like worrying about what other people are going to be like wanting instead. And I think that's something that's so, so powerful. But I think also with Michael is like just this like beautiful reminder and this lesson of patience as well. And this was something I had to take so close to heart, especially like once I got to college and like I was away from my home. I think that's when I started realizing, like, oh, wow, okay, I have a lot of healing ahead of me. And like I started going to therapy in college and then like went afterwards and stuff. And like I didn't have a lot of patience for myself. Like I had this like I like had these high expectations of like I should be here at my healing journey. I should be here. Like I should be healed from XYZ and it's like that's not how healing works at all. And it was so interesting cuz with Michael it's like is my patience amazing with him 100% of the time? Like no. There are times where like I'll make him dinner and I'm like, "All right, it's time to go eat." And he'll literally just refuse to get off the couch. And I'm like, great, you're on your own timeline. Okay. And but there are times where like he's learning a new skill or he's trying to do something like put his shoes on a certain way. And it's like I have so much more grace and so much more patience because I understand and I know that it takes him a little bit longer to learn certain things. And I learn and I respect that. I totally understand that. But I was like, why do I not give myself that same grace? When I'm doing things, when I'm healing and working through things that are really big and take a lot of time. And it's like, I think releasing timelines is something that's so powerful. Cause I think, and I don't know about yourself, but like I'm one of those people, like I have set timelines in my mind of like, I should be here by this point in my life. And like, I should be at this stage by this point. And like Michael's almost taught me that it's like, you can't force those timelines. Like you can never force when certain things are going to happen. And I think this might resonate for a lot of parents who have younger children who have disabilities and like in the standpoint and I think it was interesting with my parents because Michael and I were twins like we were together from the womb and I was that kid who was, I mean, I was crazy as a kid, but I was also the one that started walking super early. I was walking at 9, 10 months old. Like I was very early to start walking. Michael didn't walk till we were almost 3 years old. And so there is this like sense of like the comparisons were kind of right there and so blunt and obvious. But it's almost this like, and I can't even imagine what it was like for my parents to have to like see me running around like a crazy child. And then Michael's still like crawling around. And there's that level of patience that's so necessary. This level of like patience, but also like releasing the expectations of timeline, which can be so challenging. But I think that's a lesson that goes into so many different ways. And like, I've learned that in my career recently to let go of my own expectations and my own timeline. And it's like learning how to practice a state of acceptance is so powerful.
Yeah, I think releasing timelines is something I think once I realized when I started going to therapy, or not even when I started, I would say when I got into like the deeper trauma part of my therapy, that's when I realized like, oh, all I need to like throw away every timeline I had, even if I wasn't like gun-ho about it. I definitely had friends who were much more kind of like what you were describing, like I want these milestones at these points in time. So I was never to that level. I think I just subconsciously like, oh, it would be nice if XYZ. I think I was much more in like that ballpark. But yeah, but once I got into the deeper part of going through hitting my trauma and like going through it, I was like, oh, no, like I'm just gonna throw that in a dumpster because the level of hurt that I have is not something like that's not something that's going to get like if I'm gonna put the work into that, I can't hit these timelines. So I'm like, forget it. Because I knew how important actually not even how important, I knew how much pain I was in. And that was really like the thing that drove me was like I don't want to ever feel this level of pain again, and I don't want anyone in my future family to ever feel this level of pain because it's like what no person in general, and I mean I understand everyone has their own types of right, everyone has their own stuff, but I think it's just something where I was like no, like I prioritized that like over a lot of stuff. Like there was points in time right where I chose like I'm going to step away from these friendships, or like I don't have the literal capacity to even try to talk to these other people because I'm putting all of the work into what I'm doing, and that's good for me, right? That's a choice that I made that said, you know, like I need to not accept. I'm going to choose to work through it, and I'm going to choose what's best for me and learn how to like have better coping skills and like kind of work through like why am I hurt by that, and like acknowledge like okay, these are the people that I feel hurt by, and right, how does that change, and like there's a whole process to that. I think because of a lot of that, now I'm kind of like, you know, the fact that I woke up and I fed myself today, that should just be a win. Like I should get like a medal for doing that, right? Because there was a point where I was like, you know, I really just need to eat. Doesn't matter if I leave the house. It doesn't matter if I get whatever I want done. Like, but if I can wake up and eat, like that's great. And that's a big. I think that's a big thing for me. Is like I think I spent a lot of my time in my childhood and like you know school age, like making sure everything in the house was like running. Like, oh, is my sister okay? Can I help my parents? Like, is she okay? Like, did I do my homework right? And I'm kind of like doing the people pleasing and also trying to control stuff. And I think that was more my problem, was like not so much the timelines, but like I want to be in control of these things so I understand what's happening. And that was more my issue, I think, than the time. But it's that's something I've over the course of time have like, no, like I can't control if you have a good or bad day. I can control that I can walk away from this room so that you can deal with whatever. And I think that's something that I'm learning it's like, no, like I can control my actions, and if I feel uncomfortable, I am walking away. And then we're gonna let leave it at that.
Yeah, and that reminds me of, like, the other lesson I always share about is, like, that perspective. It's like, with Michael, he's taught me so much about shifting your perspective, and even, like, what you mentioned, like, you also have the power to choose. Like, you've got the power to choose what you can focus on, what you can control, and, like, that perspective shift is so powerful, and I think it's something that I think a lot of people forget about, and I always, like, mention to people, I'm always like, I think it's so funny when I mention, like, "Oh, yeah, I have a twin brother who has Down syndrome," and, like, so oftentimes the first thing I hear is, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I'm like, "What? Like, you should be sorry about me for other things, like, that's not the thing to be sorry for." But I'm always just like, "No," like, I'm so grateful to have had him because he's offered me a very different perspective of life and how to see the world and how to show up as a different human and what I can focus on. And then so I always think, like, that side is always so interesting. And I think even, like, past that and, like, my favorite lesson from him that I, like, always love to wrap up with is this sense of unconditional love. And, like, I always ask myself, like, why is it so important to keep the Down syndrome community? Like, what are they like, these things that are so important and that these individuals can teach us? And, like, I think that is something that's so unique. And I see that from my brother. I see that from so many other individuals who have Down syndrome is, like, just this, like, sense of unconditional love. And it's not this, like, this BS of, like, "Oh, they're always happy." Like, we know that's not true, but it's like all these individuals just, like, have this sense of just being so authentic and being so genuine, and they express all of their feelings, which I'm like, we could take a lesson from that rather than, like, stuffing things inside. Like, they know how to express their feelings and, like, release them, like, let them go. Like, that's something that's so important. But also there's this, like, other sense of just, like, being able to, like, be that, like, kind human. I think something with Michael that's so impressive is, like, no matter who we're around, no matter the color of someone's skin, what race they may be, who they love, what religion they practice, if someone comes up to him with kindness, he's always gonna send that same kindness back to them. And I just think that is so freaking powerful, especially, like, we see just so much hatred in our world today and so much, like, racism and just so many things that I just find so painful and so sad. And it's like my brother doesn't look for those things. Like, he just doesn't understand those concepts, and that's something that's just not who he is. And I just wonder, it's like, damn, what would our world look like if we had more people like Michael in it that were so much more kind, so much more inclusive? And a lot of that starts with, like, sending that unconditional love back to ourselves. Especially, it's like when you change the way that you show up for yourself, like, you change how you show up towards others, and that kinda creates that little ripple effect. But so many of us are so mean to ourselves, like, we're our own worst inner critics, and I know I had to work through that for so long, and I feel like I didn't finally get a grip on that till the last, like, couple years, but being able to share some of that unconditional love to yourself is so powerful. Being able to give yourself grace while you're going through the healing journey, while you're making mistakes, like, learning that it's okay to be human and, like, failure is part of the process, and, like, finding these ways to be kind to yourself goes such a long way.
It does, and it's such an important thing for all the reasons that you said, and so much more that we haven't even covered, right? Like it's being kind can do so much, right? And the thing that always reminds me about, like, the inner critic and stuff is always the, like, if your inner voice, like, was a person that was your best friend, and your best friend said, "Hey, I'm having a hard day," like, what would you say to your friend instead of but then you ask yourself that internally, and you're like, "Oh no, like, you should be doing all these things." Like, that's not how that works, right? Like, your voice is a friend too, and just being a friend to yourself and exercising the kindness to yourself in a way that you would exercise it to your sibling or your best friend or someone that you've just met, right? Like, or a child, right? Like, if a child comes up to you, like whether that's like your niece, your nephew, or cousin, whatever, like if they're coming up to you crying, you're not going to scream at them, right? You're gonna give them a hug. You're gonna ask them what's wrong. You're gonna like sit there. You're gonna be patient. You're going to exercise like your adult self and be kind. Yeah. So I guess with that, you said a lot of good nuggets in your last bit, but do you have any final words of encouragement for our other siblings listening out there?
Ooh, such a great question. I think being able to just take a step back, like for me, I always love that perspective of like, what are the lessons that I can learn from growing up with my sib? I think that's something that's so important. And I'm a firm believer that everything, like I'm such a firm believer that things work out the way that they're meant to, and that our challenges are opportunities for growth. And sometimes we don't see them or understand them in the moment. But I think it's so powerful to look back and think like, what can I learn from this situation? What can I learn about having been able to grow up with my sib? Are there ways that they've shifted the way that I show up in this world? And I think being able to be curious with yourself and look for those lessons, like look for the silver linings are so important. And of course, like this doesn't mean like deny the experiences that were challenging, and like, you know, like those experiences are so valid as well. But I always think it's so powerful to like acknowledge that and then think, okay, what can I learn from this as well? To find a way to almost like move forward in a sense. I think that's something that's so powerful.
Yeah, it definitely important to be able to say like, how do I move forward with what I've learned? Very helpful.
Exactly. And like as we mentioned, it's like everything, like every experience that we have is so valid. Like the feelings that we feel are so valid, and like my experience with my sib is going to be so vastly different than your experience. And like, we all have our different experiences and our different family dynamics. Those all kind of shift around, but they're all valid in their own sense. I think we all have this like, kind of like you mentioned earlier, this like collective understanding of like growing up with a sib, and just like that sense of community is so powerful.
Well, thank you, Julia, for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such an amazing conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. I hope you had a good time listening and feel encouraged in your own journey as a sibling to someone with special needs. If you liked this episode, please share it with your friends. And if you want to hear more stories, please subscribe to the show. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, the show can't happen without you. All special needs siblings have their own unique stories, challenges, family dynamics, and lots of life to talk about and explore. This podcast is here to let you know that you're not alone and that you matter. If you would like to be on the show or just chat off the record, please contact me. My info is in the show notes. Until next time, this is the Special Needs Sibling Podcast.